Please join me in the unison prayer of illumination that's shared on the screen. God of unending surprises, this life is a tapestry of moments woven together, and we long to be weavers of love. Today we gather and pray that you would unravel our bias, unravel our assumptions, unravel whatever it is that keeps us from you. And as you do, clear space in our hearts for your word. We are listening. We are praying. Amen.
An oracle is within my heart concerning the sinfulness of the wicked. There is no fear of God before his eyes. For in his own eyes he flatters himself too much to detect or hate his sin. The words of his mouth are wicked and deceitful. He has ceased to be wise and to do good. Even on his bed he plots evil. He commits himself to a sinful course and does not reject what is wrong. Your love, O Lord, reaches to the heavens, your faithfulness to the skies. Your righteousness is like the mighty mountains. Your justice is like the great deep. O Lord, you preserve both man and beast. How priceless is your unfailing love, both high and low among men. Find refuge in the shadows of your wings. They feast on the abundance of your house. You give them drink from your river of delights. For with you is the fountain of life. In your light we see light. Continue your love to those who know you, your righteousness to the upright in heart. May God add a blessing to the word.
Thank you, Terry. Let us say a prayer. Again, sit up, chin up. Gracious God, help us to stand tall, to wait for you, and to let our hearts take courage. Help us to not fear, to remember that you have redeemed us and you have called us by name. Help us to remember that we are witnesses to your liberation. We will not be afraid. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So I am going to start with a confession. When I woke up on Friday morning quite early, it was about 6 o'clock in the morning, which is very, very early for me. And I opened my phone and I read the news that our president had tested positive for COVID. And my confession is that I laughed out loud. I took a moment of glee with the realization that he had been, that he tested positive. Now, that isn't a proud moment for me. It's not a moment that I really want to linger on much. I don't want to be a kind of person, and Reverend Michelle said this in her thoughts about sharing prayers, is that as people of faith, we are called not to wish ill will on anyone. And so I had to reconcile within my own heart and soul what it is within me that automatically or instinctively took joy of some kind with somebody being diagnosed with such a difficult and potentially fatal disease, a disease that we have all been frightened of, and some of our families have been touched by. It is not the flu. It is not the common cold. And so I still struggle with that every once in a while. It wasn't like I just had that moment of glee and laughter when I first found out, but it creeps in all the time, this kind of sense of karma that our president has now been infected by the very virus that he has claimed was a hoax, or that it would just magically disappear. And I think we have to be kind of honest with ourselves and with one another that is a human instinct that we have, that often when we feel like we are being battered from all angles by a person or by a movement or by political rhetoric or whatever it might be, when we feel like we're being damaged day in and day out, that it is almost instinctual for us to find some joy or some, I don't know if glee is joy is the right word, but some satisfaction with the awareness that this person, this movement, this group of people are also suffering in this midst. And it isn't easy for us to sit with that awareness. I don't think, at least it's not easy for me to sit with that awareness that I have some of that darkness in my own heart and soul. And so I just want to acknowledge that even as a pastor who has been ordained for more than 20 years, who reads the Bible and prays and tries to guide our community with compassion and love, who wants to fight for justice, that even in the midst of all of my own work, my own vocation, my own faith perspective, I still struggle with that part of me that had satisfaction hearing that our president has now contracted the virus he called a hoax. And I don't know if you have seen online that there's a lot of people in the progressive movement who are actually celebrating this. And some of us, even in this community, may be feeling that way. And this is not about me trying to scold anyone, because the harm that this administration has done is real. And it affects all of us day in and day out. And we have the right to be righteously angry and scared by the injustice that has been waged again and again and again. I am not at all saying that we need to not be angry all of a sudden because he got sick. That is not what it is. But I think there's something to be done and to be explored in our own hearts when we are confronted with a situation like this, where I, as a pastor, open CNN and laugh out loud when I hear that our president is ill, because we don't want anyone to suffer. And that kind of predicament that we find ourselves in as people who yearn to be agents of love and compassion and hope, people who want to hold wholeness and to fight for justice, that we have these principles that root ourselves in that we root ourselves in, that are biblical principles. These are gospel principles, that God's love is fully accessible to every living being on this planet. But it is also biblical to struggle with these conflicting instincts that we have in our own hearts and minds. It's in the Psalms. That's part of what I love about the Psalms, is that every ungrateful or distasteful thought or prayer that I might have lifted in the privacy of my own mind has been lifted by the psalmist. The psalmist embodies for us the human struggle of being committed to justice and love, but also struggling with fear and panic and desires for revenge and taking satisfaction in karma being served up. And I think there's something powerful because I in this piece with the psalmist, there's something powerful about this because I think somehow in American Christianity, we have gotten this idea that faithful people are always good and then they never struggle with how to live out their faith in our real day-to-day lives. That biblical characters are perfect in their faithfulness and that they never doubt God's presence or God's hope or work in their lives. And it's just not true. I have that narrative so deep in my psyche from growing up in the United States with this emphasis on perfect faith and that there's no such thing as faithful people doubting or questioning or wondering. But I'm here to tell you, as a resident Bible nerd in your midst, that our Bible is filled with people who are angry, who want revenge, but who also turn to God for love and support. That's why we have a faith tradition that is bigger than our own hearts and minds, even as a community of faith in 2020. That is why it is so important for us to root ourselves in our sacred story, to be deeply committed to being biblical people, because being biblical people means that we also have grace for ourselves and our humanity, because we have been damaged. The fact that we're sitting in individual rooms and houses and not in our sanctuary now has damaged us. The fact that we continue to see racial injustice and police brutality, and we have an administration that cannot disavow white supremacy, that damages us. The fact that we have all of our students at home trying to learn on a computer instead of being with their peers and with their teachers in person. The fact that we are worried about the status and the state of our democracy and what will happen in the next month or 2 months. All of that damages us. And so we have this flight or fight instinct deep in us for survival. And that instinct sometimes speaks to our darker impulses. And that is being a person. That is being a human being in this world. And the psalmist in Psalm 36 reminds us of that. And throughout the Psalms, you can read beautiful prayers of celebration and affirmation and love, and you can read prayers that can disturb you to your core, because the Psalms were written by human beings who suffered and struggled and had to struggle within their own hearts and minds to find the connection to God and God's will for all of creation. And so we hear in Psalm 36, I'm reading a little bit different version than Terry read, but we hear this, the prayer of David, deep in the heart of the violent, perversity is the only oracle they hear. We can see that in some of our leaders. But even as the psalmist laments, feeling like he or she is being surrounded by the enemy, even in that midst, They lift a prayer of hope. Your love, Yahweh, reaches to the heavens. Your faithfulness to the skies. Your justice is like mountains in their splendor. Whether human or animal, Yahweh, you keep us all in your care. How precious is your love. Whether creatures of heaven or children of earth, we all find refuge in the shadow of your wings. We feast on the bounty of your estate and drink from the stream of your delights. In you is the wellspring of life. And in your light, we become enlightened. In your light, we become enlightened. So when those thoughts pop into your head, the thoughts that might make you feel uncomfortable about your own desires for people who have hurt you, hold on to this prayer. Pray that prayer. And then ask God to come into your heart, to bring light into your life so that we all can be enlightened. Because we are not perfect people. Perfect grace, perfect faithfulness, perfect love is God's alone. We are just called to be faithful on the journey in the midst of this deeply, deeply, deeply difficult time. So your power prayer for this week. Chins up, chest out, and pray with me. Your love reaches to the heavens. Your faithfulness to the skies. Your justice is like the mountains in their splendor. We all find refuge in the shadows of your wings. May we rest in the refuge of God's wings. It is good to be God's people in this place. And for that good news, I give thanks to God. Amen.